Welcome to another Flashpoint Q&A. Thorin is at blasting away. The production looks really good. Mad Lions just beat Fnatic, so that's a big win for Flashpoint. With me is Mr. Daniel Fiden, who is representing his Aloha spirit today in Hawaii with a fabulous black and white shirt. I like that one. That's a good one.
Thank you. Can I unmute now?
Yes, you can unmute now. I give
Awesome.
you
Hey,
permission to speak.
yeah, thanks, man. My wife gave me this shirt.
I thought you were going to say my wife gave me permission to speak, which would also be appropriate. But so we're gonna have questions probably pop up. I will ask some of the questions that we've had for the last few weeks. So let's talk about fines. Everybody wants to know how teams are getting fined in a world where we haven't had the highest level of competition or the most competition because of online matches. So how are teams deciding whether they're in the top 20? We also haven't seen the CSPPA ranking debut yet. So how are we measuring who are the top 20 teams? These are all important questions.
Yeah, so they are important questions, and I will give you all of the answers that I have. So the easy short answer is that in the absence of a CSPPA authored ranking system, we're using the HLTB rankings. I think we're all very happy. I'll leave it to other experts to opine on whether the level of competition right now because of the online play has changed or is a bad indicator or anything. But I think you're seeing lots of positive movement and really great performances from number one, Cloud9,
True.
but
Gen G,
also Gen G, Mad
Mad
Lions. I
Lions.
think that, I think that as of right now, we have, gosh, I haven't looked today, but I think four of the Flashpoint teams are in the top 20. I think Mad Lions is somewhere around number 11. Cloud9, last time I looked, 16. And Gen G is right around 15 or 16 as well. So I think that we've had a lot of positive movement since the beginning of this initiative, and we want to continue to see that. Um, so the fines. So yeah, we're administrating the fines right now, and the fining system is going to continue to be an important part of Flashpoint. We made the we made the decision to kind of request that the CSPPA administrate a ranking system. Unfortunately, I don't have any details on what that system might look like, and haven't heard much from them about their progress into authoring that system. But we knew that it wasn't going to be available at the beginning of Flashpoint 1 regardless, and so we kind of specified we'd be using HLTV until the point at which the CSBPA has their own system. We are Lurpus, Tommy from Immortals Gaming Club is doing quite a bit of work with our board of governors, which includes two players, to do some modifications around the ranking system. I think one of the things that we realized is that we needed to build into the structure some way to avoid penalizing teams who made the decision to rebuild. Because the way that we designed the system, there was this somewhat weird dynamic where if, for example, you were let's call it a number 19 or 18 team, you were in some ways disincentivized from taking a risk to sign new players and kind of upsetting the apple cart. You were avoiding fines, but you were a little bit kind of avoiding fines at the lower end of the fining of the safe threshold. We ultimately want to see our teams take risks that they need to get up into the top 10 and top 5 in the world. And so we're trying to design a system where there are periods of time within the year that the fines aren't applied, so that teams can kind of take those periods of time and do make bigger rebuild decisions. As soon as all of that is sorted out, it's actually happening right now. We'll share it with everybody publicly.
It also seems kind of weird that you would necessarily apply the fines during periods like the player break, in which case it is kind of like hard or impossible in order to change your positions in the rankings. So I guess that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I actually don't know. I don't know what happens to the HLTV rankings during the player break. Do they just freeze?
I would assume they would. I mean, there's
Yeah.
no way for them to change, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that when we put the system together, the spirit of what we wanted to do is right, and we're absolutely sticking with that spirit. We're just refining it because, frankly, it was some bad design work on my part. So thankfully, we've got someone a little bit smarter working on it now.
well, and it's just about knowing which periods are going to operate correctly and how it's going to work when it comes to making sure the teams do have, like you say, the motives to actually improve constantly. So I'm sure we'll get that out there soon. I know a lot of you have been asking for that. Here's a good question for you, Dan. What qualities do you look for when seeking new partner organizations for Flashpoint?
That's a great question. So you should give that person Joe. Joe. That's a great question. Yeah. So this is one that I think gets to the heart of what we're trying to accomplish with Flashpoint. I think the number one thing that we're looking for is an ownership group that has access to capital, that has an aggressive and competent management team across esports. And so that means their ability to kind of commercialize their esports business, to
Well,
operate
nobody's
kind of
qualified, or we're done here. So
yeah, yeah, right. They're they need to. I think one of the things that's really important to us that you might not necessarily think about is it's important ownership groups and the teams that we think about have proven their ability to operate an economically sustainable business. That doesn't mean that every one of these teams is profitable or massive, but if it feels as though the team is just completely um, ill-equipped to ever commercialize their business or build something sustainably, we don't want to see them in Flashpoint, because ultimately that are co-owners, we're reliant on one another as partners and co-investors, and this is an initiative that we intend to kind of work on together for years, not months. And so it's important that we feel as though there's something, um, there's a viable business there. Um, we have paid attention to individual teams' ability to put together top quality organizations competitively, not necessarily in Counter-Strike, but in other games. We do want to we want to see some evidence that teams have been able to compete at a high level in whatever games they happen to participate in. But obviously, as you can see from some of the partner teams that we have right now, they're new to Counter-Strike, and so they're just putting together those programs. We would love to be able to find terrific ownership groups that have access to capital at the scale that we need to see, and also currently have the best Counter-Strike players in the world. Like, all of that would be great, but there just is not that combination. We found that out there in the real world, that combination frequently doesn't exist. And so we're biasing the things that we think are going to lead to these organizations, and therefore Flashpoint being successful in the long term, not the short term.
Also, just for the follow-up question, if somebody asked why did we take an organization like Contact, who is not in esports before, they were actually, it's the same ownership group that owns the Paris Overwatch League team and Call of Duty team. So it's just a different brand and a different name that is used for Contact. So they haven't been in esports for a very long time, but they have been in esports already.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously the McCourt family has a background in traditional sports. I can tell you that there are things that Drew, who's kind of the owner of Contact, brings to our group that is pretty unique. Again, this is not something that would be broadly known out there, but they have one of the French football clubs their family owns. And when we were before COVID hit and the Overwatch League all changed, we obviously had started to sell tickets and promote the live events in the Overwatch League, and putting on kind of live events and selling tickets to live events and making those events kind of commercially viable is an entire business in and of
Yes.
itself. It's a unique skill set that I will say that is not one that Cloud9, for example, has. It's something that we need to build out or learn or partner with somebody for. I can tell you, Drew and the team that he put together for the Overwatch and Call of Duty games. Without sharing anything confidential, they were generating more ticket sales and more ticket revenue for the events that would have happened in Paris had COVID not hit than any other team in the Overwatch League. And it wasn't even close. I mean, their operation for putting these events on and selling those tickets was, for me, it was amazing to watch. It was like I was trying to I was trying to slurp their brains as much as I possibly could to
Well,
figure out how to
well,
do
to
this
be
stuff.
to be fair, they do have it a lot easier, partially because they own the Marseille Football Club, correct? So they already have the market in France to do that and the access to the fans. And also French fans are just famously fanatical at esports events. Like, it is one of the very best countries to hold esports events in my opinion. But yes, like, super experienced in that regard.
All right, so I'm gonna ask you a question. Top 5 countries for live esports. The MonteCristo list.
Okay, so this has to be a caveat because I haven't done any events in Northern Europe because that hasn't been a big market for League of Legends. So coming from the kind of League of Legends Overwatch background, I would say that I would actually say cities because it like Dallas is great for esports in America, but the rest of America not amazing. The Philly finals were pretty good this year for Overwatch League, but I would say Paris is probably number one for me. The London is really good for those kind of events as well. Sydney, the Overwatch World Cup event that we had there was insane. And all of the CSGO events that happened in Sydney are crazy. The Australian sports fans, they have no problem just getting wasted at 10 a.m. and then doing shoeies for the entire event. So that's always a good time. So I love doing events in Australia. Really good crowd there. Korea, obviously, Seoul, way up there. So I think those are I would say those would probably be my top, like Sydney, London, Paris, Seoul, and Dallas. I think I've probably had the best events in.
So how do the Korean events compare to an Australian event, for example?
I mean, they're less crazy, but the cool thing about the Korean events is all the Korean fan clubs that show up and all the chants that go in the crowd for the teams and the way that those fans really support their teams insanely well. And it comes from this entire network of online mailing lists and online fan clubs that are all set up that are very well organized by the fans themselves. So it's a really kind of organic fan movement there. That's pretty cool.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
China has big crowds, but the issue is when I've done events in China, the Chinese fans, if Chinese teams don't win, get really, really angry. And so it gets kind of scary, actually. So, it's fun if they're winning. It gets kind of scary if they're not.
Here's a good question I'm seeing.
Oh,
Qualification spots.
yes. We will always
Yeah,
have
I mean,
qualification spots.
yeah, we'll always have them. I actually, I felt like it was really, really great to see non-partner teams kind of compete at such a high level. And in particular, I thought that having Orgless perform as well as they did throughout Flashpoint 1 was really great to see. It's kind of like exactly what we'd like to make part of Flashpoint moving forward. That's my opinion. What do you think, Monty?
Yeah, I think it's healthy for the teams because especially when the teams themselves are incentivized to make roster changes to continue to be the best, I think that as a discovery mechanism, having open slots for teams to come in will give our partner teams a chance to scout potential players that are on the rise. I think we already saw that happening because we've already seen a ton of the players that were in the open qualifiers either doing well, like Havu in other parts, in other tournaments so far, or I mean, at least we've seen a bunch of the players from places like Orglis. I mean, we just saw TSM's Valorant announcement, which included many of those players, so it's giving them exposure in the future for sure. So yeah, that will never go away. It's also just a kind of a core part of Counter-Strike that you wouldn't want to see disappear for any reason. What is your opinion on adding individual player POV streams for Flashpoint for the people who are willing to pay? I mean, as a long-term goal, I think that's really, really cool. It obviously takes an enormous amount of bandwidth to add 10 additional HD streams out of a facility. I would love to see that happen. And I think one of the things that I would really like to do for Flashpoint, and one of the things I think Overwatch did very well, is partner with Twitch on the All Access Pass, where you could flip between all the individual player POVs. And as a long-term goal, I think it would be really fun to add something like that for fans as a premium feature that you pay for. Personally, I think there's a lot that can be done with that.
Who do you think is doing that best?
I mean, nobody's doing that well right now, because Overwatch League went to YouTube, so it doesn't exist anymore. And
yeah,
I think when it comes to what Riot has done with ProView, that's the closest thing, but that's also a premium feature that they have released. So I think somebody needs to step up and actually work with Twitch, but it has to make sense for Twitch too, for that partnership to be profitable. But we haven't even talked to Twitch about that. That's just something I've floated internally in the past, is about different ways we could add premium features. But I think it would be very cool to do that. And I don't think once we got it set up, it would be very hard to continue.
Yeah.
Do you think Flashpoint 2
online or LAN?
Online or LAN for what?
For Flashpoint 2.
I don't know. Can you... Who has a crystal ball and can see the future of this pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that it's 100% certain that it'll be online rather than LAN, but I think it's 90%. But again, I think that this is going to be driven not necessarily by Flashpoint or any of the teams. The decision is not going to be driven by that. I think it's going to be driven by the kind of environment out there in the world. Obviously, I'd love for it to be LAN. We've got a beautiful studio that's only been partially used, and we'd love to be able to have Flashpoint 2 be LAN, but I think we're assuming that it will be online right now. I hope that we can. I hope that we can do some work if we do have to have the second kind of round of Flashpoint be online. I'm hoping that we can really rethink the way that we put together the broadcasts and listen. I think that COVID and the quarantines have been obviously incredibly challenging for everyone, but it is a really interesting forcing function that I think has gives us an opportunity to really rethink the business and rethink why historically have esports made the decisions that they've made around putting together broadcast. How much of this is just esports people making traditional sports decisions because that seems somewhat obvious versus really trying to start from first principles. And with people like Monty, I know that will do all of that thinking, but yeah, I feel like there's it's a good time to try crazy and innovative things actually as a result of this.
Yeah,
So
and I think like
there.
at least Blast right now has really impressed me today with what they've been able to do remotely. So when we have more time, and I think I think what happened with moving Flashpoint One online was very good by Faceit in how they got all the teams into the houses and how we had all the resources available, especially since they had to do that in a few days mid tournament. But I think Blast is showing us right now what is possible when you actually have a longer amount of time to plan for these contingencies. And so hopefully we'll do that. In regard to these other questions, we do want to have Flashpoint twice a year. The original plan coming into this year was to be doing the first one when we did it and then do the second one in the fall after the Rio Major. We're still waiting for official confirmation from Valve about when we can operate Flashpoint 2, but we are planning on doing it in the fall. And as far as LAN or online, online, obviously, one of the tricks that we're going to have to figure out is that we do need all of the players probably in America, at least to have a fair online competition when it comes to ping. So whether they go into team houses and sequester here again is a question. I can say at least prior to the protests that have been going on right now, LA was starting to open up again. So it just depends on the regulations that the city issues regarding gathering and what the players and the teams and the organization of Flashpoint think is going to be safe, whether that's, people coming back out here for several weeks to be sequestered in their team houses, or whether we have whether it's possible to do a LAN event without an audience and with, I would say, limited crew interaction between the players safely. But it's hard. It will be hard to do that.
What next, Monty?
When will FPX sign a roster?
It's a great question. I'm not I'm not in charge of that. Listen, I know that they're working on it right now. Someone told me that they had heard from them. Someone in Europe told me that they had heard from them. I think we should get somebody from FPX on one of these streams in the next few weeks and
That
have
seems
them
like a
answer
good
that
idea.
question.
Who is the
Yeah.
sacrificial victim for FPX?
I don't know, Doinby.
Toynbee. Let's get a LoL player on. All right. So
Yeah.
somebody's asking, are they already a member? Yes. The answer is yes.
Yeah.
They are already a
Yeah.
member. They just don't have a CSGO team. They put the money
Yeah,
into the Flashpoint bank account, but they haven't put the money into the player bank account yet.
Yeah, and I mean we talked about this before, but the situation that they went through last time um with the heroic roster was crazy and unfortunate for everyone, and right in the middle of the world melting down from COVID. But they were working really hard on that. Now they've got a little bit more time, but I know that they're working on it. And yeah, we're at a place now where we, I think, understand a little bit more of what was going on in the background and why the Astralis thing
Yeah,
ever
turns
happened.
out Astralis was lying. Who could have known?
Well, I don't know.
Except everyone who understands history and previous actions. Shocking, guys.
Yeah,
shocking.
yeah. Well, it's
Dan learned
they're-
learned all about Astralis's lying throughout this process. He learned all about it. He's
I
now an expert.
I I don't want to say that. Listen. It's such an amazing, legendary roster. And I hope that they end up in a good place. Listen, even if that roster ends up not kind of playing together anymore, there is something. I mean, maybe Thorin is probably the person to really opine on this, but like, there is something about you would hope that the end of a roster like that, or the end of that era, would end in some really kind of positive way somehow or another. And right now it feels like yeah, they're just going through going through a moment. But I hope that team in that era is able to kind of get it back together and start playing together really well again, or that somehow say goodbye on really positive terms.
I
Because
hope
they've
that
been awesome
happens
to
under a
watch.
Flashpoint partner team. That's what I hope for, Dan.
That would be cool. That would be cool.
I hope that's what happens.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if they can't get back together, maybe they'll go, join some other Danish teams. Bubski's looking absolutely great right now. Maybe they could just go bolster Mad Lions a little bit. Maybe they could just come together with some other Danish players. Maybe Fun Plus Phoenix can go pick these guys up. Who knows? Who knows what will
Yeah. Who
happen?
knows?
Who knows what the future holds? Uh, let's see here.
I'm looking at some of the questions.
Yep. So we
How
have.
many should we talk about, like expansions and teams
Yeah,
and
yeah,
all
yeah.
that?
People are wondering how much. So last time we kind of gave the answer that in terms of expansion teams, and what would be the largest number of teams we would run with a Flashpoint style thing. In the near future, we said like the most teams that we could see in a Flashpoint event would be 16, probably, including open qualifier teams. So not partner teams, but just because of the format. And also remember, guys, we can't just do this all year. We have 2 limited time slots that we have to work with during the calendar because we can't interrupt, the IEM cycle or the ESL1 cycle or any of these other individual tournaments that tend to happen. So if we start having too many teams, then we can't have cool formats. So I would say 16 would probably be the max, which would mean that instead of 3 groups like we had last time, we would have 4 groups instead, which still works. But yes. And then as far as partner teams go, how many partner teams would you envision being a manageable number?
I think that that 2 to 4 open qualifier slots is probably, 2 is definitely the minimum. I think 4 is probably the maximum that we would want to do, but I'm not. I'm saying that mostly by feel. We've after Flashpoint 1, we kind of picked up the conversations with organizations that were interested in Flashpoint, leading into Flashpoint 1, and I would I think there's a reasonable I would have said prior to COVID it would be almost certain that we would add 2 additional partner teams before Flashpoint 2. Again, I'm just trying to be very transparent with anybody who follows this stuff or cares. Obviously, COVID has had a huge macroeconomic impact. It's going to have a huge impact on um, esports teams' ability to raise money, at least in the short term. And I know that there are a number of organizations out there that are having to kind of substantially change their plans as a result of the macroeconomic impact that we're all going through right now. So I don't want to say that it's 100% certain that we're going to have 2 more before the end of this year, but I think it's still reasonably probable. I've been surprised actually at I, I will say that I have been surprised that the level of interest from organizations is as high as it is right now, given COVID.
Well,
Does that make sense?
they're finally forced to think about how they can make money, Dan.
Yeah, well, I think I think it's a good point. I do think it is a good point. I mean, yeah, listen, I think it's a good point. I think it's going to be it's going to be a super important, 12 to 24 months for most of the team organizations out there. And I think there's going to be tons and tons of changes that happen as a result. But yeah, good news is we've had, we have kind of conversations going with, got 4 or 5 team organizations right now that are pretty credible, potentially very good partners. So we'll keep you guys updated as those conversations kind of develop.
Here's a great question. Does Flashpoint have plans or aspirations to run tournaments of other games? Yes. except not Flashpoint. So to be clear about what Flashpoint is and is not. So many of you guys remember that the first rumors or indications that this Counter-Strike project was happening was that when it was called B-Site, which is the name of the company that owns Flashpoint. So Flashpoint is specifically a Counter-Strike brand. So will Flashpoint be running non-CS tournaments? Probably not. I think if we were to have long-term aspirations in other games, we would create a new name and a new brand for that tournament that was more appropriate to the game and the tone we were going after. But yes, I mean, we are interested in, if Riot, they've said publicly already that their plans for Valorant are to have independent tournament operators working the esports infrastructure for the game, at least for the next year or two. They have stated that publicly. We would love to potentially run some Valorant events. I would be interested in taking a look at Hearthstone personally, because it doesn't have as much of a Twitch tournament presence at the moment, since a lot of it's gone over to YouTube. So that would be something I would be interested in doing. We've discussed potentially other Valve titles like Dota. So yeah, I think there's a lot, as long as it makes sense for the partner teams to run divisions in those games and that we can do it in an intelligent and hopefully profitable manner. That's what we would like to do. So any games that we think that is possible in.
Yeah. Yeah, we're not, the ambition is not to, I think there are some publishers that given a strong option where there's a tournament organizer that can put together a really top-notch product and has the ability to generate, meaningful fan interest and kind of reach as a result of the teams that are involved. I think that there are some publishers that would really kind of prefer to work with somebody outside, and so we're super psyched about working with any of them. But I think there are going to be others that just, they always want to run things internally. I think Activision probably, will always be that way. They've really committed internally to building their esports division into a big business that's part of their business in the long term.
Yeah, well, we'll see how that goes.
Not a word out of you, Monty.
Let's see how it goes. Looking great for COD. We'll stop there.
Somebody said hi, Grandpa. I'm guessing that's for me. Hi, Ryan.
But yeah, I think for us, it's just a matter of finding, whatever partners will work in that scenario. When we talk about Activision as well, there's sort of two different layers to it, because there's sort of, I think you could say that, Dan, about Overwatch and Call of Duty, but they've already farmed out StarCraft to ESL. So there's clearly like different levels of motivation of supporting those games from Activision. So game by game dependent.
All right, Monty, here's a question for you. Do you think that there will ever be another StarCraft?
Okay, this is so I started as an RTS caster in my career, and I actually fucking love RTS, and I really, really, really would love like a tier 1 RTS esport again. I think the problem with RTS is that no one wants to actually play them. And why I say that is because, coming from an RTS background, the reason why everybody played RTS was because if you wanted to play a multiplayer game, it wasn't oftentimes reliable with the internet the way it was when RTSs like Brood War came out in the late 90s and early 2000s. Like, if I was to go into a game and we were playing 5v5 and then some player dropped out on either team, it kind of ruins the experience for everyone. But once internet connections got more stable and you could reliably have those experiences, most players went into team-based competitive games. The reason why RTS, I think, will never come back is because they are not fun to play. They're challenging, but they are horrible experiences, and most people can't take the psychological strain of losing and then not being able to blame their teammates. So when you lose at an RTS, you basically just sit there and you're like, shit, I suck. And then you have to deal with that reality. And in order to improve, you have to go back and watch your own replays and really think about why you lost. And I'm not a developer, and I have no idea how to do this, but I think the only way we could bring RTS back is as a team-based game, like a 3v3 RTS. So I think RTSs are just so hardcore, and like most people don't want to get off a day of work and sit down at their computer, play a 1v1, and face the reality of their own shittiness at the game.
Yeah.
I think that's just
sad. I mean,
this is psychology.
In some ways, it's like StarCraft is such an incredible intellectual property,
it's great,
and everything. That it's it's a shame that
they're also highly watchable. They're highly watchable games.
Yeah.
Like they're actually really easy to watch. I would say StarCraft is the second easiest esport to watch, because the thing about it is that even if you know nothing about the game, the units do a very good job of visually displaying how strong they are. And if you have a huge army going up against a smaller army, you kind of get the sense of that scope. It doesn't take long to explain to somebody who isn't even a gamer the sort of way you watch StarCraft. And obviously the camera view is very good. StarCraft has been, in my personal experience over the last 15 years, second only to Counter-Strike in terms of ease of explaining to non-gamers. And just providing an insane viewing experience. So I love these games. Yeah. I wish StarCraft would come back, but I just don't think RTS is in a I don't think most people want to play RTS right now.
Have you played the that Amazon game yet?
Crucible?
Yeah, I haven't played it yet, but I was reading kind of an interesting review about it the other day. That was much more positive than, frankly, I had expected, given the numbers that I saw for the downloads so far.
Yeah, I think the game, like it was dropping in terms of Steam user base to like the 150th game, and there were even after a huge launch where they paid a bunch of streamers, it was already dropping down to like a few thousand concurrent users. So seems kind of dire. My take on looking at it was that it looked kind of fun to play, but those sort of third-person MOBAs are very difficult to spectate as an esport, like Smite, except it's more complicated than Smite is. So I guess I wouldn't have a lot of hope. Just in general these days, I've been thinking a lot about the durability of esports in general, and I guess that's why I'm a little even turned off of Valorant to a degree right now, because I'm concerned that the addition of a bazillion agents are just going to make the game really difficult to watch, and it's going to add layers of complexity and layers of abstraction. Whereas you look at the most durable esports like StarCraft Brood War in Korea, which is still being played professionally to this day. They haven't patched it since like the early 2000s, and it's just based off of maps. And so if you have a good game with good core mechanics like that, or Counter-Strike, and the game is deep enough, then you can make a very good viewing experience that doesn't have a million like things that have to be explained about it or changing constantly. And I think League does well, but it's because it has the largest player base in the world, so it has a lot of people who know the game. But Counter-Strike definitely converts the best of players to esports viewers. So I know that's like we're getting into like designing an esport theory, but I've been thinking a lot about this, and I think we now actually have sufficient data to really consider what a really good esport is going to be, and I think that's why Counter-Strike is going to be here for a very long time.
I mean, I don't want to like get out over my skis too much here, but like I do feel like the timing of League and the growth of it as an esport, I think, was really important.
It was.
But I also think there's just something fundamentally the pro the kind of positive around League as a viewable esport is single camera top
Yes.
down. There's like
Same with
this
RTS. It's the same
basic
camera.
yeah, territory control is, even if you don't understand the micro or any of the strategy, what you do have is this notion that, you know, a game of tug of war is something you can tell very quickly who's winning. And there's a bit of that in League of Legends. Now the downside is like the number of characters and the micro is
Yeah. This is,
so
but Dan,
difficult
this
to
is
learn
the thing about
if you're not
StarCraft
hardcore.
is it's the same
Yeah,
thing. It's the same concept of territory control. It's literally the same angle, except in StarCraft
yeah,
you don't have to learn 150 different units.
yeah.
And like
Yeah, I mean,
each
it really is the beauty of Counter Strike. Counter Strike, it is like, in you know, kind of the 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 individual kind of like gameplay strategies are the hard thing to learn. The rest of it is pretty straightforward, really, right?
yeah. But the strategies can be explained very well by good commentators. That's the thing. Is
Yeah.
like StarCraft is a pretty straightforward game to commentate. Like, I'm not saying that what they do in terms of knowing strategies is easy. I'm saying that if you have the playbook and you do a lot of research, you have the time to explain to the viewers exactly what's going on in that game. So it's a really natural fit. Also, for those talking about Warcraft 3 being easier to spectate. So I came from Warcraft 3. That was the first game that I commentated, and I did it for years. And I can tell you that the problem with Warcraft 3 is that once you start to add all those heroes and abilities and everything and items to the game, it just becomes more abstract. This is what I'm talking about, adding layers of abstraction to things, because as soon as I have to start explaining what all the 3 different heroes and all their abilities and the fact that they each have 6 item slots and are activating all these items and things that you can't see all the time, it becomes much more complicated. Whereas, you know, in StarCraft, most units just attack, or they have like one ability. So it's way easier to understand. And that's the concern that I have with Valorant too, is like, I feel as though CSGO has the utility in terms of smokes and flashbangs and mollies, and those are all easy to understand. But when you continue to add agents, you will run out of ways to do those abilities. So you're going to have to invent new abilities that add more complexity to the game that just confuse viewers in the long run.
Yeah, what do you think is the best designed kind of agent right now that doesn't kind of, you know, very kind of directly mimic CS functionalities?
Probably Brimstone or Phoenix or
Hmm.
Breach, that I think are well designed and more balanced. I like the Phoenix ult as an ability to like use on entries, and I like Brimstone's ability to control the map. I think it's interesting. I mean, Sage is terrible. It's just really bad. But they're going to have I think they're going to have a lot of issues. And I think that the games that we've seen do the best have been kind of one thing that has been true of a lot of games is that they only have one sort of thing that is changing. And by that I mean, in StarCraft, you didn't have a lot of balance changes or additions into the game, but you had the maps refreshing constantly. In League of Legends, you have the same map, but you're seeing additional characters being added and them trying to like refresh the meta. But for the most part, that, you know, the map is remaining the same except for little tweaks that they do. And I think in Counter-Strike, you know, you have occasionally the map pool rotating, but it's been the same maps for a very long time and very minor balance changes. So I think I am concerned that with Valorant, they have said that they are going to try and create a more static map pool, but the more things, if they start adding more maps and more characters simultaneously, there's too many variables. It gets really hard to control. Let's see here. Sorry, I don't know why this was deleted.
Mid-season cup, that's a league question.
Yes, I did see some of the mid-season cup. Rip Korea. They look bad. Let's see here.
I wasn't able to watch it.
Yeah, Knight is amazing. The mid laner from China. Let's see here. seen much of a media presence for Legends of Runeterra. I don't believe in that game. I don't think that game has an audience. As somebody who's a competitive card game player myself, it hits this really weird middle ground between casual. It's not casual enough to make me want to play it casually, and it's not hardcore enough for me to really get super into it. And I think most card games, like, did anybody really ever want anything between Magic and Hearthstone? Like, is that a market? Not in my personal opinion. Has there been anything you noticed during Flashpoint Season 1 that worked particularly well or unique or similar to other events and will carry to the future seasons? Anything you implemented that you're looking to tweak or remove? We really couldn't do everything that we wanted to do. I don't think we're going to remove anything per se. I think it's more about carrying over with the things that we did have that worked well, trying to encourage more trash talking, setting up opportunities for doing that, implementing rewards for players who trash talk well. One thing that we wanted to do was add like a trash talk, like WWE style belt, where we would add a cash prize, and then like every phase we would award the best trash talker, and then like transfer that belt from player to player to make it fun for them, and to encourage that, and to encourage the fans to like get involved with supporting that kind of banter. So things like that.
Yeah, I felt like the format actually worked really well. I felt like it was fun to watch. But yeah, I mean, I actually, in retrospect, I feel as though, I'd like for there to be substantially more kind of shoulder content outside of the individual competitive games.
Yes.
And I felt like the kind of looseness with which you guys approach the content led to a lot of more interesting unguarded moments, right? Maybe like the peak viewership was not as peaky as a result of there being kind of maybe a little bit more looseness and a little bit more kind of content, but I felt like the moments and the kind of sense of access that you got when it was working well was really cool.
Yeah,
again, it's like one of the ones that, like, for me anyway, I've talked about a bunch as being an inspiration for part of what we wanted to do with Flashpoint was Beyond the Summit. I just feel like it's a all right. So here's a really a super dumb comparison that probably people on Twitch are not going to love. But just recently, a couple of weeks ago, there was this charity golf thing that was on television. That was like Tom Brady and Tiger Woods and some other football player and some other golfer, right? And they were just like playing golf and raising money for charity. I didn't watch it, but my father-in-law watched it, and he was watching. I walked through the room, and he was telling me what was cool about it. So I watched it for like 5-10 minutes or something, and the thing that struck me is like watching golf as kind of like traditionally produced for me is incredibly boring. It's just so antiseptic and just boring. And this was basically like no camera people. They had installed little cameras in the golf carts. The actual golfers were like driving golf carts. So they were just talking to a camera while they were driving these golf carts. And it was super, super loose. And I felt like it was like, in some ways, the esportsification of golf for a second. It was like this cool kind of like level of access and casualness that I found much more interesting, even if I didn't like really care at all about the golf. And when I think of Beyond the Summit, I think that that's something they do really, really well, and I hope we are able to do more of that in Flashpoint.
It's also coming. We see the format changes coming to traditional sports too, through like basically NBA has now been talking about adding more tournament play into the season. There has been a lot of stuff that I think we're going to see traditional sports coming our direction in terms of production and formats, rather than us going in their direction. Just because those league formats are not exciting or interesting, and people want to feel more casual and relaxed around the pro athletes these days. So that's something that was always sort of core to Flashpoint. And I do think that, we would have made more feature content and shoulder content had we had the ability to. It was just very hard to access the teams because of the coronavirus pandemic and everything like that.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I feel like it was a, it was a solid start for us, but we've definitely got a long way to go.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible to make a Beyond the Summit style tournament but still have the weight of an ESL Cologne? Yes, I do. And here's how you do it. You change the tone as you get into playoffs and as the playoff run gets deeper and deeper. Like, we would have things, I think, more casual and relaxed during phase play. And then as we get into a stadium event, we say, okay, we are altering the tone to be more serious during these particularly serious matches, right? We will be wearing suits for the playoff matches instead, and it's going to be more pomp and, prestige in those moments, whereas it might be a little looser and sillier during the actual phase play, right? So I think that you can do that effectively, and you don't have to commit yourself to a certain tone for the entirety of a show or the entirety of a run of a tournament.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like part of it is like going on the journey with the players and the teams and the talent and the organizations, right? If we can make it so that uh, this may not be I'm not trying to kind of explain it literally, but like if you imagine that early on in a tournament, everything is a little bit more casual, a little bit lower fidelity. The cameras are much more behind the scenes. You really start to get a sense of the teams and the organizations and the talent as people. And then as the competition progresses, it gets slightly more formal and
Yes.
slightly more kind of official looking.
Yep.
Then maybe you don't have that same level of access for the championship game just because that doesn't work if you're in this big, whatever hypey production. But by that point, you already kind of know the people, and
Yes.
so that emotional connection is a lot stronger.
Yeah, and at that point too, you're going to change the kind of content that you do. So, for example, while we might have more loose, player quotes or like banter earlier on in the competition, what we would probably do for a big final is to take some of those clips and intercut them maybe into a small documentary telling the story of the team throughout the season. So you formalize that content later on. So there's a lot of ways that you can sort of do that without losing the core tone, but making a little bit more serious for the most serious matches. And I do really, really believe in doing that. Like, you do not want the same things in a final that you would want to have on a daily basis, right? Because the people will tune in for the final because it's an excellent match and they want the hype. Whereas you want people to tune into matches they might not watch normally because it's going to be, they know they're going to get something fun and unique out of it, right? So different purposes, really. Here's a question for you, Dan. How do you fix the tier 2/3 CS scene? Because it's hard for you guys to have academy teams right now to develop players. Do you want to explain why that is?
Yeah, I mean, I'll explain it as best as I can. Uh, Essentially, because there is a prohibition on multi-team ownership for any kind of major qualifier by Valve, it creates a dynamic where it's essentially impossible to contract uh, a group of players and to start up an academy team or a farm team, because those players know that they will be unable to participate in the major system at all.
Yep.
So why would, for them, if their kind of goal, if their objective is to ultimately win a major, let's just say for the sake of argument, it would be, they would be condemning themselves to never being able to do that if they were to sign as like a Cloud9 academy team, for example. which I totally understand, right? And certainly multi-team ownership is a very serious thing that I think, every esport needs to figure out a way to regulate and contend with, in a, number one, transparent way, and number two, fair way. I think the transparency is the biggest piece. Fans need to understand what the relationships are kind of across organizations and teams. And I think if you're transparent and your rules are fair, the fans will hold you accountable, and there'll be a lot less suspicion that something untoward is happening. I think where you have problems is when the rules are unclear, the relationships between teams are unclear, and then people just start to assume that bad things are happening, even if they're not. Certainly, sometimes they are, but they're not always. So anyway, that's like one thing that needs to get solved, and I also think that there's a cultural thing, right? I'm probably not the best person to talk about this, but I think that there is a culture within the player community that at least I've seen kind of, from my perspective, where players are somewhat reluctant to support the development of other players, right? If I'm one of the starting five on a team, and the organization wants to sign a sixth of someone who has no experience, a lot of talent, but needs mentoring, there can be a sense among some players that, why should I help groom someone who may eventually take my job? I understand that, but I think the risk there is, you're going to end up killing the game because you're just not developing any good talent.
We've also said this before, but guys, we need to fix tier 1 Counter-Strike first. Okay? Like, I know you guys
Yeah.
are super interested in tier 2 and tier 3, but can we fix tier 1? Cuz here's the thing. If tier 1 becomes profitable and things are looking good in Flashpoint, it will ripple out to tier 2 and tier 3 because orgs who are not in tier 1, sort of like less professional orgs or smaller orgs will start to support tier 2 and tier 3 because they know that they can start selling those players contracts to tier 1 teams, and the more profitable
Mhm.
tier 1 teams are, then the more profitable it's going to be for those teams to sell contracts when they start to train and raise up and coming players. But like,
I mean, I
let's
I
fix
would,
tier 1 first.
in a very early version of kind of what we were trying to do with Flashpoint, there was a notion of a mandatory academy league that would
Sure.
run in parallel with it, and so each team would be required to field both a main team and an academy team. The academy system would run, like the LCS academy system, for example, and um, I personally think that that's a really, terrific system, and I think it forces organizations to, um, think about talent development, or at least forces them to invest in the next generation of pros in a material way, not not just in a kind of bullshit, say nice things on Twitter kind of a way. Um, which I think is good. But, to Monty's point, there's other issues that I think need to get solved first.
Yeah, let's fix tier 1 and then we'll talk about tier 2 and tier 3 guys, cuz tier 1 is
Yeah,
the big problem.
I mean, I know that there are very smart people whose opinions that I respect that disagree with this, but my feeling is, um, within kind of the tier one of Counter Strike, the biggest organizations, you're dealing with players who are getting paid, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, who have support from not just a coach, but like in many cases, multiple coaches and analysts and managers and nutritionists and sports psychologists and all of this like infrastructure around them, right? And full-time housing. I mean, this is really like it's a real operation. Um, w- how you can develop as a player in that kind of an environment has nothing. It's just like the notion that some kid can just show up with a PC and compete with people who are getting that level of support is just, I think, unrealistic. it may happen in these, like, there may be, there may be exceptions to this, right? Where there is someone who, without any resources, appears on the scene and is just incredibly gifted. And despite all of their, despite the lack of support that they maybe have gotten, they're able to kind of like burst through. But I don't think we should kind of organize a real kind of like industry and sport around that assumption. We shouldn't kind of like,
Yes.
assume that's going to be the case. I think we need to recognize that there are probably a lot of players who, given a little bit more infrastructure, could take that second leap. But without that little bit of infrastructure, they're going to have to do things like play Counter-Strike at night while they're working a job during the day. And they're just never gonna, that'll never enable them to fully, fulfill maybe what they could do. And so I feel like, yeah, I just kind of feel like we could, my instinct is that we could increase the level of play, we could increase the depth of talent, and the richness of the game if we thought through that a little bit more difficult. It's a great marketing story to say Joe to pro. Like, everyone loves that marketing story. It was the same thing in like poker for a long time, right? If people like follow professional poker, it was the Chris Moneymaker story. It's like, where did this guy come from? And then he won the World Series, right? And yes, that does happen occasionally, but the people who actually are able to make a career out of this stuff in the long term, it is not about getting lucky once. It is not about showing up in your, uniform from Blockbuster Video and winning an event. It's about like really making this a vocation over a long period of time. And I think that we need to be honest about that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that is a conversation for the future. And I think it's something that everybody, especially because this is a team run league, is interested in supporting in a way that it wouldn't be the motivation of other leagues who are not collectively owned by the teams in order to try and figure this out. We'll ask one last question here as we wrap up the hour, which is somebody's asking sort of like, or saying orgs need to stop giving players like 90% of the prize pool winnings, because paying for the salaries and then paying for the, giving out most of the prize pool is, too much is what they're saying. I think it would be very difficult at this point in time because basically every team gives out the vast majority, if not all, of the prize pool to the players, to even sign players if you tried to get them into some sort of arrangement like that. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that the prize pool split with the players is not the core of the financial issue in Counter-Strike. It has nothing to do with it, right? Like, no one credible goes and does a board meeting for their esports team ownership group and says like, we're going to win this many prizes this year, and that's how the money's going to like work out. That's just not a plannable revenue stream. So I don't think that's the org problem. Simultaneous though, I've had conversations with players in the past where I have pulled historical data across a bunch of teams, about prize winnings to model for them, or try to kind of model for them, this is what your expected prize winnings should be over the course of the next year. Like, yes, I want you to aspire to win every prize, but like as a financial decision, it's kind of like saying every time I buy a lottery ticket, I'm guessing I'm going to win the jackpot, right? You need to somehow assume that isn't going to work out every time when you're making that decision. And I think, sometimes I worry that players overemphasize prize money when they're thinking about their total compensation, right? I would strongly discourage a player to, personally, if I were a player agent, for example, like if the decision is about, a 401k or like, healthcare benefits or something like that versus an additional 10% of the prize money, I would choose the 401k and the health insurance. But I've definitely heard some conversations with players, but that's kind of not the way they think about it. And so for the person who called me grandpa earlier, I'm going to really live up to that and say you should be thinking about your retirement. But I think that's real. Like I think that's something that the players need to think about too.
Yep. Okay. Well, thanks guys. I know most of you have been, watching Blast or whatever. So appreciate you coming by, during a nice tournament that's going on. We'll see you for another one of these next week. The time might be slightly different for reasons that we can't announce yet that are related to B-Site/Flashpoint. So we will get back to you guys with that. And after Blast has concluded, figured out when we will do the next Q&A. I hope this answered many of your questions that you had on the team side over the last couple of weeks. We'll probably have players back on next week to talk about Blast, if I had to guess. But thanks. Thank you for joining us, Dan.
Bye.